Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Live here, and today we're going to be taking a look at this. What on earth could it be? Oh, you've seen the thumbnail. You've seen that. You know it looks a little bit silly. Yes, this humble little slab is the One X Player X1, and it turns into something quite different when you attach the controllers onto the side. Yes, this is a handheld device. And again, it's another device that's taking a lot of inspiration from the Switch. That was me folding the back thing in, don't worry, that's not like a bad click. Yes, the controllers just slide off like that. We've looked at something similar to this in the past, and its Switch DNA just makes it utterly intriguing. But, well, does it go deeper than that? Is there more to it? Fingers crossed, because otherwise it's just a slab. I'm going to take you through things in an unusually structured manner. We're even going to have chapters and things like that. It's all going to be broken up, much more digestible. It's been more work, but you're worth it. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. So what is this thing? Well, this is a portable gaming device that runs on Windows, and it's got controllers and rails, and the controllers come off, and then they do another thing. You also get this in the package, which is essentially something for the controllers to clip onto, like so, and suddenly you've now got a controller that can either attach to the side or it's very similar to a Joy-Con grip, essentially, but it is its own thing. It's got like a little slot at the back for a dongle, because that's how it connects wirelessly. But that's magnetic, that's fun. It also comes with a magnetic keyboard that just attaches like that, and that's actually a nice little feature, because whenever you're running Windows, you want a keyboard handy. It's got a little stand on the back as well, and the stand, I've got to be careful with this, is magnetic. It just attaches by magnets, and that's... okay. Don't shake it like that, but it is sturdy. It's also got surprisingly good speakers. Apparently they're Harman Audio, which is a good thing, I suppose, but I was surprised how good the speakers actually were. Usually portable devices, they're a little bit pants, but I suppose maybe it's something to do with the chonkiness? We'll get onto that. It also has a screen, which I've turned on, and it did turn on reasonably in time. And it's a really nice screen, actually, even though I've probably covered it in fingerprints, even though I cleaned it just before recording this, because I've had to handle it. It knows me. The screen is an IPS LCD. It's not an OLED, unfortunately, but it is still a very nice LCD. And its resolution is a whopping 2560 by 1600. Which I don't think I need to tell you is a pretty high resolution. It's higher than HD. It's not, I suppose it's closest to something like 1440p, but a different aspect ratio. It's 16 by 10 as opposed to 16 by 9. And it's 120 hertz, which means that it's not a 60 hertz display, it's a 120 hertz display, and it's slightly spoiled me. I now really like 120 hertz. The build quality is actually surprisingly sturdy on the unit itself. There is a fan, I think it's the only fan in here, no jokes, and it does emit a very faint buzzing noise when it's at low speeds, but you can only hear it if you put your ear up to it like this. What happens if I put it to the microphone? The controllers, unfortunately, don't fare quite as well. They feel very light and really quite cheap. The plastic is of reasonable quality, but they feel hollow because they are hollow. There's very little going on here, and the buttons don't feel the best either. And the D-pad is rubbish. Again, we'll get more into the controllers later on. You get a power adapter with it as well, a 100-watt power adapter. It says it's a GAN, but given its size, I don't know, I'm a little bit dubious. And a cable as well. Actually, it's a decent cable. No molding lines on the actual plugs. Nice. As I mentioned before, it all runs on Windows, if you couldn't tell, but it's got its own software built in as well, and it's not entirely bloatware. It's reasonably held back, actually. There's a lot of things you have to install optionally, which I quite like, and you can do all that by pressing that button up there, and suddenly this little menu appears, and you can do things like you can control the CPU's TDP, which is how hot it gets, essentially. Basically, limit how much it puts out. I don't fully understand it, but I know that games run bad when you turn it down. You can enable the CPU's turbo as well as change volume, brightness, all that sort of thing. It's handy to have, and it'll overlay over the top of pretty much every game. I did find some games just hid it behind it. I don't know. I don't fully understand why. It's Windows. You can also get like a basic front end, which is fine, but it's not really worth it. A lot of alternatives that are far better exist out there, like Steam Big Picture Mode being a good one. It's okay, but those are the basics. But what about the practicalities? In terms of portability, it's actually surprisingly good. I mean, it is chunky. Let's not try and avoid that fact. It's a thick boy, but the fact that the keyboard itself is so thin, you really want to take it with you. It means that it all dusty, meaning that it remains reasonably portable. You're going to want to put it in a bag, but it's kind of, I would describe it as like a thick but stout laptop. That seems fair. Okay, we've avoided it for a while, but what about the practicalities of using this as a handheld, as it is advertised? Here's a big surprise, it's not very good. Without any controllers, without the keyboard attached, without the kickstand, this thing weighs at nearly 800 grams. And you're gonna want that other stuff on there. Maybe not the keyboard, I suppose, but with all this extra stuff attached, it ends up weighing this much. I haven't weighed it yet, but it's too much. When you first hold it, you sort of think, okay, well, this is heavy, but I can kind of get used to it, but it's just too much. I mean, just look at it. It's just too big. And more importantly, even if the weight wasn't a big deal for you, there does seem to be a bit of an issue with the way that it connects. So rather than using connectors at the bottom like a Joy-Con, it has these little pogo pins, which is a reasonable idea, but they don't seem to be the best. I've found a number of times the controller's just disconnecting when I'm moving, you know, sort of like adjusting my grip or something like that. Or I don't know, the weight of the unit means that it drops out slightly, and then the whole controller disconnects, and then you're in a bad position in your game. It's not ideal. Moreover, there's a worrying amount of wiggle in the controllers when they're attached to these rails. It's not massive, but out of the box, it's too much. It just doesn't feel like it's properly flush. The margins are too great, and as a result, it doesn't feel secure, and I don't feel comfortable using it for any long period of time. To be honest, I just don't feel comfortable using this as a handheld full stop. It feels kind of like, I don't want to say a marketing gimmick, but it feels like, hey look, it's a big handheld. And to be fair, I'm making a video about it, so you succeeded. You see, I only need to move this around a bit, and you see there's lights going off? That means it's disconnected. Just that much movement. But the controllers can also be used wirelessly, can't they, using this little thing? Is that any better? Yes, it is. Do you still want to use the controllers? No, unfortunately not. The controllers themselves are not great quality. I mean, they're okay. They are not, like, terrible or anything like that. I mean, the D-pad has, like, it has almost, like, 2 levels of contact. So you press it down, and it sort of, like, it bounces down. The membrane goes down. Presumably it's a membrane. And then you press it, and then there's another level. You've got to push it further. So it's almost like there's a 2-click system. But that first click does nothing, which you wouldn't expect it to, or you would expect it to just put the standard input in. The sticks feel okay, they're a little bit lightweight, the buttons are a little bit noisy and a bit weirdly springy. I don't know how else to describe it. It sounds like there's actual springs under there. I don't imagine there are. That's just how it feels. The triggers feel kind of plasticky as well, but it's not worth it. The controllers don't feel nice to use, they feel kind of cheap. And that's kind of reflected in the fact that the first one I received, the left-hand controller, didn't really work. I mean, it did. It worked fine for the most part, but I went into Halo, and the left trigger was constantly depressed. That sounds bad. The controller was sending the signal constantly that the left trigger was being pressed just a little bit, which means if you're playing something like Halo, you're zoomed in all the time, you're looking down iron sights, and that's not a fun time. I tried going through the recalibration system, it didn't seem to help, and eventually I got in touch with the manufacturer, and they were very apologetic, and they were like, yep, no, that's fine, we'll send you another one. And they sent me another one, and it works better, as in it actually works. It doesn't constantly think that the left trigger is being pushed down. but it's still not comfortable to use. They're still not good controllers. So it's a bit of a moot point. An absolutely integral part of any portable is battery life, and this thing contains a whopping 65 watt-hour battery. That's not small, it's just not. Playing YouTube, it'll last you for about 4, maybe 5 hours at a push, depending on your brightness settings and things like that, and that's something you're gonna have to take with all of the things to do with battery. It depends on your settings. And at the other end of the spectrum, full whack games, you know, games that are really pushing the system to its limit, you'll get around about an hour, maybe an hour and a half. That's not brilliant, but again, using that TDP control I mentioned, you're going to be able to get a little bit extra out of it here and there, if you can afford to. But let's talk a little bit more about the screen. Now, the screen, as I mentioned before, is lovely. That high resolution, the 120 Hz refresh rate, it's really nice. The fluidity of motion is fantastic, and everything is pin sharp, which sounds brilliant, and it is, but it's also a problem when it comes to running AAA games, because this is a mobile device. It can't run big games at that resolution, and as a result, don't turn off. And as a result, that means you've got to go into settings, turn things down, which is fine, but it's still a high resolution screen, and you're going to be powering all of those pixels regardless, which means that the battery life maybe could have been a little bit better with a low resolution panel. I don't know. Well, no, I do know it would be. And that 120 Hz, again, it's lovely, but it is sucking battery life away. It's wonderful, don't get me wrong, and to be honest, I think I prefer it with that, but it is something to bear in mind. Out of the box as well, the color accuracy was terrible. Everything was oversaturated. The reds especially were almost like bleeding out, and skin tones looked atrocious. But after calibrating it and all that sort of stuff, it now looks delightful. Reliability-wise, it's been a Windows machine. Once I got all the drivers and everything set up, all the updates and all that sort of thing, it got a lot more reliable. But I have to say, I have noticed some unreliability, particularly when it comes to using the CPU Turbo or Boost. What the hell is it called? Turbo. I was getting certain full system crashes and things like that, and generally I've just left it off, and it's been really, really reliable as a result of that. So I'm probably going to keep it off. I did run into some issues using an external monitor at one point, using the USB-C out here. It would just crash after a while, like the entire system would crash. And later on, it would just sort of like stop connecting to the screen. No idea what it was. I don't think I even updated the driver, but after a while, I got in touch with them again, and they were just like, oh, can you give us more information? I was like, sure, I'll do a proper test, run it through its paces, and it's been absolutely fine ever since. So I can only imagine it was a driver issue. That's what the crash log said. So that's AMD's fault. And if you really, really wanted to use an external monitor and you wanted to get the most out of this thing, there is something a little bit special on the top. Hiding under this flap is a little thing called a headphone port. And next to it, an Oculink port. For anyone who doesn't know, Oculink is essentially a PCIe connection in like a cable form rather than a great big whopping thing on your motherboard. And that is exciting. It means that in theory, I've not been able to do this, but in theory, you could connect an external GPU or even just a standard GPU with the right adapters to this thing. You can just give it a GPU. That's pretty bonkers. This is kind of a feature that a lot of people were saying the Switch should have, where it has essentially an eGPU, like a GPU within the dock. So whenever you dock it, I mean, you don't dock this, but you plug it into a TV or monitor, you get significantly better performance. And I really wish I could test it, but I don't have an eGPU, and I don't have the appropriate adapters to use one of my standard non-eGPUs. So for me at least, this is staying as a purely portable device. So how does it handle games? The heart of this thing is an AMD Ryzen 8840U. I wish I could tell you more about what that means, but AMD have probably changed their naming system during this recording. But suffice it to say, it packs a portable punch. Doom Eternal, for example, I was able to exceed 60 frames a second on high settings using, you know, sort of a reasonable resolution, and again, twiddling, fiddling, all that sort of thing. You can get different settings. But I was able to get over 60 and I was a happy boy. Doom Eternal is dead efficient though. What about something like Baldur's Gate 3? Well, I was able to get it running and I was able to get a reasonably stable 40 frames a second with some reasonable sacrifices using things like FSR 2.2, which is an upscaling technology, and as a result it was pretty good. Not amazing, but pretty good. Remember, this is a portable machine. Halo Infinite was able to get decent frame rates, around about hovering at 60 again, sometimes a little higher, sometimes a little lower. It depended on the map more than anything, and whether I was playing Firefight. If I did that, sometimes it could get down to the 40s. Again, it's Halo Infinite. It's not the most efficiently made game. I did get gyro aiming working though, so I'm a happy boy. And that's where I was going to leave it for my testing. You know, I did other games, lighter games, and obviously they run fine. Stuff like Sonic Generations runs without a fault, obviously. But then I thought, well, I do have access to Starfield. I could give it a go just for a laugh. So I installed it, booted it up, and yeah, I was running at around about 15 to 20 frames a second, exactly what I expected. But I thought, I'll go into the settings, can I turn anything down, get a little bit more juice out of it? And then I saw, hang on, I've heard about this FSR 3 thing. I'll turn that on. It's another upscaling technology, like FSR 2.2, but freer. And whilst I was in that menu, I noticed another option called frame generation that became available when I selected FSR 3, and I thought, well, I've heard of that. I'm not really sure I want it to just be making up frames. It's going to look awful, like motion smoothing on TVs. And that's essentially what the technology is. It's just competent. But I turned it on just to see, and what? The frame rate basically tripled, and yes, I lost some definition, absolutely, but this is a portable unit. It's turned off now. Sleep mode. But I was able to go over 60 frames a second in enclosed environments. I didn't even think for a moment I would ever come anywhere close to that. That's insane. I've never seen a game as big as Starfield, as notoriously bad to run as Starfield. I meant hard to run. Run even remotely this well on something that's portable. Like, it doesn't run that well on the Xbox. You know, it's 30 frames a second. It's a lot crisper, obviously, but it's still 30 frames a second. I'm well aware they did an update. I just don't care enough to check it out. And this got me really excited for the Switch 2. What if the Switch 2 could use something similar? And it turns out that FSR 3, admittedly, it's very unlikely that the Switch 2 would use that considering it's an AMD thing. But what if it could use some other similar frame insertion technology, something like DLSS, which is NVIDIA, which is what the Switch 2 will have. It's a really exciting prospect. It genuinely blew my mind to see Starfield running like this. It's just a shame it's Starfield. So to sum things up, the One X Player X1 is a strange little device. It really does not do that well as a handheld, to be brutally honest. It's just impractical. It feels like a marketing tactic. I don't know if it was, but that's how it feels. The whole Switch DNA of the rails and things like that, it just doesn't work for something of this size. It's just too big. But strip away all that Switch stuff, and suddenly it works! During all my testing and everything like that, I've essentially been using this as a tabletop device. I suppose a bit like a laptop, a gaming laptop, not that I've ever had one. And in that area, it absolutely excels. It runs brilliantly, and it can handle pretty demanding games, to be honest, and it handles them surprisingly well. Not amazing by any means, but again, it's a portable device. You have to limit your expectations. I've honestly had a blast using this thing. It's made me reevaluate the Switch in some ways, and appreciate the Switch in others. Like, for example, the reliability of this thing, whilst it is reasonably good, I'm talking it's reasonably good for a Windows machine. You're still going to run into issues like the resolution has suddenly changed, or you have to rebuild the resolution table. I don't even know if that's what it is, but it's something I had to do. I lost all resolutions on this thing, bar the native. This thing offers incredible flexibility, but it comes at the cost of simplicity. And that's where the Switch excels. You just buy a game, you put it in, or you download it or whatever, you hit the big button that looks like the game, and it just loads and it just runs, and it's exactly how you imagine it. This comes with a little bit more homework, but it can also just be rewarding dealing with that sort of thing. It's not for everyone, but for many people, it's actually a little bit of a bonus. It does come at a cost though. This base unit sans fingerprints, they're mine, you can't have them, will set you back in excess of $1,000, which is not a small price tag. You are getting a lot for your money, I have to say. You're getting really good performance on a portable thing with a great screen and reasonable battery life. But whichever way you slice it, $1,000 is $1,000, and if that's making you wince, then maybe think twice before diving in. But if you're thinking that's exactly what I need, I'd be surprised if you'd be disappointed. It's a really lovely unit. Lastly, big thanks to 1xplayer for sending this over for review, but let me know your thoughts. Do you think it's a big, heavy, silly device, or do you think it's actually got decent application? Let us know with a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then why don't you cover that subscribe button in fingerprints? Just because it's a lovely thing to cover in fingerprints. And be sure to check out NintendoLife.com for all sorts of lovely Nintendo-related content. Thank you again for watching. Bye-bye. Yes, this humble little slab becomes something quite different, with a little bit of off-camera trick. This isn't going to work. But they've got their own software in there as well. You press this little button up here, and oh God, they just reflect the light.